There are people all across America sick over what happened in Dallas and fearful that the murders of these police officers will mean that vital questions raised by Alton's and Philando's deaths will go unanswered. That is a reasonable fear.
A brutal attack on our police force is an attack on our country and an attack on our families. We must stand in solidarity with law enforcement, which we must remember is the force between civilization and total chaos.
Presidential contenders Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump react to the shooting deaths of 5 Dallas police officers. The carnage in Texas was just part of a bloody week in the U.S. It included the prominent shooting deaths of 2 black men by police officers, one in Minnesota and one in Baton Rouge. Those deaths triggered nationwide protests against police, demonstrations that continued last night in numerous U.S. cities. Even in the midst of this violence, the race for the White House continues. And for more on that, we're joined by our U.S. political panel. So Luiza Savage of Politico and Paul Brandus of West Wing Reports. Both are in our Washington studio. So Donald Trump was highly criticized for his response to the Orlando shootings. And Luiza, he has, of course, reacted to what has taken place in the United States this past week. What do you make of his reaction and to the reaction in the shootings there?
Sure. Well, let's look at the tone and the substance. In the wake of Orlando, he put out this very self-congratulatory tweet about, I told you so, about Islamist terrorism and so on. This time, he was much more measured, much more statesmanlike, calling for unity, striking a very different tone. But on substance, you can see he's really aiming at his supporters, talking about the need for law and order, almost taking sides with the police in this bigger national conversation about police violence and racism in the criminal justice system. So he's taking a side on the law and order side and really, raising the specter of violence and talking about people not feeling safe in their own country, where we've seen Hillary Clinton talking more about putting ourselves in the shoes of African Americans worried about their children's safety when confronted with police, for example.
Well, of course, both candidates canceled public events in the wake of the shootings in Dallas. So, Paul, what do you think of Hillary Clinton's response to this week's tragedies?
Well, it was measured also, and unlike Trump, who appears to be taking sides here and speaking to his base, she really is talking to 2 constituencies, talking in kind of broader terms. She has supported and empathized with the Black Lives Movement in the past, as she certainly did again this week. At the same time, though, she certainly says that police lives matter as well. It's a delicate balance that she has to make. And the broader point here is that one of the problems that, and I think the president alluded to this, is that people don't have to choose sides here. It's not one or the other. I mean, there's no doubt that some cops are bad, but at the same time, it's not unfair to suggest that some of these shootings perhaps are justified. It's not, if you pardon the pun, not a black or white issue. So Clinton is very delicately trying to thread the needle here. Trump, on the other hand, as Luiza mentioned, clearly appears to be taking sides here and speaking to his base.
So just picking up on what Paul is saying, Luiza, the Republican Party playing the law and order card. They have in the past, certainly, seen as the party that can do that. Could this help Donald Trump?
I mean, I think it will entrench his supporters and energize his supporters. And same thing for Hillary Clinton. I think this is a very divisive election. They're speaking to 2 very different audiences. I mean, Hillary Clinton has been traveling around with the mothers of young African-American men who've been killed by police. So she's very much inclined to understand where they're coming from. So as we now see protests around the country getting more heightened and more violent, people taking stronger sides on this, neither one of them is very well positioned to be a uniter, and neither one of them is emotionally inclined or talented to be that person. I think we're going to see President Obama come out this week and try and hold some meetings, bring people together and strike a tone for unity, but that's really difficult in the midst of a presidential election. And I don't know if it'll help Donald Trump, but I think it will certainly entrench his supporters and further go to his claim that he's the guy for law and order and for tough security.
Well, Luiza, it's great the way you put that, to say inclination and talent, because that's what it might boil down to, certainly. Hillary Clinton, with her constituency, hoping to not only what she has traditionally brought along in terms of the black vote and her supporters, but hopefully bringing along Obama supporters to the polls. How Paul, could this affect her chances?
Well, in terms of African-American voters, she has an absolutely overwhelming lead over Trump. I saw a Pew Research survey data spreadsheet just yesterday. She leads by 91 to 7%, absolutely overwhelming. And that's even before Barack Obama, a black president, really gets deeply involved in the campaign. On the other hand, she trails Trump, the same survey said, with white voters by about 8 or 9 points. So she has to be very careful in talking to white voters, not to say things that will alienate them. Not enough whites are supporting her, and that is her biggest problem going forward, along with, of course, the trust issue that she has. Both of these candidates are deeply distrusted by both Americans, so they really have to be very careful about what they say, not to alienate the base that they have, while trying to bring in people outside their base that each has to have in November.
So, Luiza, the party's conventions are almost upon us here. People initially concerned about never Trump movements and anti-Trump movements at the Republican convention. Could you see these latest protests in the streets, literally already, having some effect on either of the conventions?
Well, you could easily imagine the protesters about police violence and the counter-protesters taking their views to Cleveland, where they'll have a big national stage. You'll have the world's media converging on the city of Cleveland next week. And this is a city where they have their own issues with police and relationships with the community. It was, I think, less than 2 years ago that a 12-year-old African-American boy who was playing with a toy gun at a rec center was shot dead by police, and that death of Tamir Rice really wounded the city. So this is a fresh wound, and I think in addition to all the other protest movements that are coming to Cleveland, we could see more people coming to talk about this, to demonstrate. The Cleveland police announced in the wake of these shootings that they're taking additional security measures. They're doubling up cops and police cars. They're bringing in police from other cities. Now you have a situation where the protesters will be worried about the police response, but now the police are worried about anti-police shooters and snipers. So it's going to be a very tense situation outside the convention hall.
Well, the U.S. shootings overshadowed another major event in Washington this week. The FBI recommended not charging Hillary Clinton for her handling of classified information on her private server, or should say servers, and the Attorney General agreed. So, Paul, the FBI cleared Clinton, but gave some ammunition to those who might want to run anti-Clinton campaign ads. What do you think of all that has unfolded on this file this week in Washington?
Well, James Comey, John, the FBI director, came out, as we all know, and said that she was extremely careless in her handling of emails. In doing so, he essentially gave Republicans sound bites to cut in a commercial. The FBI director, extremely careless, boy, pretty sloppy for someone who, as president, would be handling classified intelligence and data every single day. That being said, I think the worst is clearly behind her. I mean, being called careless is certainly a lot better than being indicted for a crime. And I've been saying for a long time that the odds of her being indicted were probably pretty low. The difference here is that making a mistake is one thing, but showing deliberate criminal intent to commit a crime is an entirely different thing. And Comey said that they did not think that she met that standard. Republicans obviously are not satisfied with that, and now they're looking into Comey, by the way, and his handling of all this. It's important to remember, of course, that Comey is a lifelong Republican, by the way, who is appointed Deputy Attorney General by none other than George W. Bush. So for some people who have called him a Democratic lackey, that's simply not the case. He pointed out that we simply don't have enough to go on here to recommend an indictment. But again, Republicans just are not satisfied with that.
Finally, Luiza, we've got just less than a minute here. What are your thoughts on this and Hillary and her emails?
I thought this was very wounding for her. He stopped short of criminal indictment, that's true, but he came out and contradicted numerous things that she had said. She had said that there were no classified materials among these emails, and he said that was not true. She said she'd handed over all her business-related emails. He found others that had not been handed over. Now, maybe this wasn't intentional. However, there were a lot of things that she said that he contradicted, and that goes to this point that people don't necessarily trust her. I think it also undermines her argument about her competence and her national security reassurances when he's saying she was using this unsecure private email in hostile countries where she was probably, they were trying to hack her. So I think this caused her a lot of problems. There's also a civil lawsuit underway. A judge will be considering soon whether she needs to make a deposition in that lawsuit about whether or not she was using these private servers to avoid the Access of Information Act that applies to government emails. So I don't think this is over for her. I think she escaped the worst, but it was still damaging.